So when you leave here today, I'm hoping and I'm trusting that you will walk away with one thing at least. If you leave here today with nothing else, I want you to walk away knowing that God is near to you, nearer than you might imagine. The Jews in our passage today that Roman is addressing, that Paul is addressing in Romans, missed that fact. In fact, all of chapters 9, 10, and 11, Paul is explaining how the Jews missed it. Not just that, but the gospel itself. In chapter 9, Paul explained to us that the Jews were missing the fact, they were missing this because God hadn't chosen them. He had not chosen all of them for salvation. And he spent the entire chapter talking about that. In chapter 10, he comes to the notion that they are ignorant of the gospel. So Paul has kind of changed his perspective. In chapter 9, he's looking at the Jews' rejection of the gospel from God's perspective. In chapter 10, he starts looking at it from an earthly perspective. So he can explain the underpinning, the spiritual reality behind that which we are seeing on earth. And that's what chapter 10 is really focusing on, that which we see here on earth. And what it amounts to is ignorance. Paul talks all through chapter 10 about the Jews' ignorance. And he talks about ignorance in different areas, in different capacities, and in different ways where the Jews are ignorant of God and God's work in redemption. Last week, we saw the beginning of chapter 10 where we learned that the Jews were ignorant of God's righteousness, and further, they were ignorant of Christ's role in salvation, and they were also ignorant of the law and the purpose of the law, and all these three things tied together. They thought that God was less righteous than he was, and they thought that they could be more righteous than they could be. And they thought that maybe if they could be just as righteous as they could be, they might just live up to God's righteous standard. They might just achieve God's righteous holiness. But what they failed to realize was two very important things. God's righteousness was not here, but it was infinitely greater than they could possibly imagine. And their righteousness was not here, but it was far lower than they had imagined it to be. And so there's this great chasm of distance between the righteousness of man and the righteousness of God, an inseparable, an unbreachable distance between the two. And they were ignorant of that fact. And they were ignorant of the law, because when they received the law, they misunderstood the purpose of the law, and they thought that the law was to tell them how they could achieve that level of righteousness by which they would earn God's forgiveness and God's salvation. They misunderstood what the law was about. The law they rightly understood that the law helped them to know what was missing. Remember, they understood the question. They figured out what the equation was, 4 plus 4. But the answer they got was 7. They figured out that the law was telling them that they were unrighteous and that they needed righteousness. The problem was they didn't figure out how to get that righteousness. They thought it was by doing good works or obeying the law. And so they missed out the essential end to that equation. They knew the problem, they missed the solution. And they mixed that up. And because they mixed it up, we learned last week that they were very zealous, hugely zealous to obey the law. They wanted to follow God's commandments. And they did a really phenomenal job, above and beyond almost anybody else before or since. They made laws to help guide them to obey the laws. And they followed these laws to the letter, to the T. But the problem was their zeal for following the law was misguided. They were following it for the wrong purpose. Their motivation was inappropriate, was wrong. Their motives were misapplied. And so their zeal, their passion, was wrong passion. It was wrongly focused passion. They wanted to follow the law because they thought by obeying the law it would make them righteous. And they missed the point. The law is never designed to make anyone righteous. The law can only tell us when we've done something wrong. The law says this is when you've done something wrong, and the law can only point to wrongdoers. The law can only point to lawbreakers. And so the law was designed by God to point to the fact that we need help. The Jews missed it. We need aid. The Jews overlooked that. We need assistance. We can't get the righteousness no matter how hard we try, no matter what we do. And the Jews totally overlooked that. The law was designed to point us to our need, which in turn was designed to make us seek out Christ. That's what the Jews missed. They misunderstood the law, so they misunderstood Christ. And that's where our passage picked up today. Paul says in verse 4, "For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes." That's the end of last week. We pick up today. "For Moses writes about the righteousness that is based on the law, that the person who does the commandments shall live by them." So what is Paul saying here? Moses writes that the person who does the commandments shall live by them. Essentially, you first read that. He's drawing from Leviticus chapter 18, and you first read that, and you say, "Oh, wait a second, Daniel. You missed it. The person who lives by the law can live. The person who lives by the commandments, the person who does the commandments shall live by them." So if there's anybody who can perfectly obey the commands in letter and spirit, they shall live. Do you know anybody like that? Have you met anybody like that? I know one person like that, and I hope you know him too. But other than that one person, there's nobody else. Who is the only person who is able to and has lived out the letter and the spirit of the law completely and perfectly? Who is it? That's right. And that's what the command says. Leviticus chapter 18 says that anybody who lives out the commands, anybody who obeys the commands flawlessly, perfectly, with the right spirit and the right attitude, in accordance with God's will live by them. They will live. And we have one example on all of human history of a person who's done that. And his name is Jesus. He was born in a little town called Bethlehem, raised in a little town called Nazareth, and was crucified on the cross. And we're going to be remembering that crucifixion in just a couple weeks here on Easter Sunday. We remember that every week, but a special remembrance on Sunday, Easter Sunday. So there's one person who does that. And that's the point of Leviticus 18, really, is that if you can do it, you will live. But you can't do it. And that's the point of the law, isn't it? To show us that we can't do it. And that's what Paul goes on to explain. The righteousness based on faith, but the righteousness based on faith says, "Do not say in your heart, who shall ascend into heaven, that is to bring Christ down, or who shall descend into the abyss, that is to bring Christ up from the dead." And I'm going to stop right there. This passage here has given me a lot of trouble for many years, and I really struggled with it because it was really weird. And what exactly does it mean? Who shall ascend into heaven to bring Christ down, and who shall descend into the abyss to bring Christ up from the dead? And why does it say it, and what purpose does it have here in Romans, and what's the connection? It seems really disjointed to me. This week I listened to probably about a dozen sermons and read different commentaries to help me understand that. And I think I've got a handle on it, and I think it's actually fairly simple when it comes down to it, and I think you'll be able to understand it as well. First of all, Paul is drawing from a Hebrew idiom, a phrase, an idea. And it's this idea, who shall ascend into heaven? And the contrary idea, who shall descend into the abyss? And so really the point is, his question is, who can ascend to heaven? The implied answer is what? No one, right? Nobody can ascend into heaven. Now we have some pretty phenomenal rock climbers in our day. They can climb mountains all over the world. And of course we're talking about, Jews on foot. We're talking about, on a back of a camel or a back of a whatever you would use to climb a mountain. But mountain climbers today need a lot of skills. They need to be in great shape, first of all. They need to understand weather patterns and seasons for the mountains that they're going to climb. They need to be in great physical shape to climb mountains. They need to understand GPS and tracking and maps and navigation, orienteering. They need to be in great shape. Did I mention that? They need to know their territory and know how to climb. They need to be able to carry all their gear, and they need to be in great shape to do these sorts of things. And did I mention they need to be in good shape to do this? Right? There's all sorts of things that mountain climbers need. And we even have mountain climbers who will climb the highest mountain on earth, Mount Everest. And they will get to the top, and they will probably take a quick picture and turn around and start to come back down, and come, quickly back down so that they can survive. And that's amazing. I met a guy probably 13 years ago who actually tried to climb Mount Everest. He had lived on the base camp. He's up here, Dwayne. He flew away. Flew up here. I know he's bothering you. So he tried to climb Mount Everest, and he got up to base camp and made it up beyond that. And he came back. He had been there for a couple of months because there's a season for climbing, and his skin was like leather. It was brown, and it was hard because of all the cold weather, the frosty living. But he was very skilled. And people that climb Mount Everest have great skill. But here Paul is saying, let's go one step beyond that. We're not saying climb the tallest mountain on earth. We're saying climb the tallest mountain on earth. And when you get to the top, that's only the beginning. That's the base camp for the real climb. The real climb is only about to begin. Basically what he's saying is, it's impossible. You cannot ascend into heaven. And the next impossibility is the opposite. It's sort of like doing this sort of, this sort of thing, up and down. Who will descend into the abyss or into the deep? And for them, the deep ocean was a mystery every bit as much as the skies were beyond the atmosphere. They didn't understand what was at the bottom of the ocean because they couldn't get down there. They could only use their imaginations. They heard stories of great sea monsters, and they heard the tales of sailors who were known for their integrity and honesty. Sailors around the world are still known for that today, right, Brian?
That's right.
That's right. So they had these stories of sea monsters and great fish and all these mysterious things, and their imaginations went wild, and they tried to imagine what's down there, how can we get down there? And you couldn't. You could only go as far as you could hold your breath. But beyond that, you couldn't see. It was a murky mystery. And so who can descend into the abyss? The answer again is equally no one. And Paul's drawing from this ancient Hebrew idiom, this phrase, this parable sort of idea that basically nobody can do it. And he's applying that back to the law. Here's the law. If you obey the law, you obey the commandments perfectly, you shall live by it. And then he says, but the righteousness based on faith says, do not say in your heart who will ascend into heaven or who will descend into the abyss. Why? Because you can't. You can't do it. Righteousness based on faith comes as a gift, not as an accomplishment. But there's these two little phrases in there that kind of even bring out a little more meaning into it. The phrases in their original, not in this section, but in the Old Testament where they're drawn from and in the Hebrew idiom, had no reference to Christ. But Paul is drawing Christ into this imagery because Paul is talking about Jesus. And he brings Christ into this picture. He says, who will ascend into heaven? That is to bring Christ down, and by that we mean the incarnation. Remember, Christ was in heaven with God the Father, and he came down to earth as a human being. And who will descend into the abyss, or the deep, that is to bring Christ up from the dead. That's the resurrection, bringing Christ back from the dead. And equally, this is another impossibility, for he said nobody can go into heaven to bring Christ down. Nobody can incarnate Christ except for who? Christ himself. God the Father sent Christ, and Jesus himself came in the flesh. And nobody can do that. We have lots of science and technology today, and we can send rockets into outer space. But can we devise a rocket that can shoot up into heaven where God and Jesus reside and say, okay, Jesus, come on with me, get on my rocket ship, and we'll come back down? No, we can't. We don't have trans-dimensional technology yet, and I don't think we ever will get it. We can't transfer a person from this realm into the spiritual realm and back to bring Christ with us. It's an impossibility. But then the other impossibility is to descend into the deep to bring Christ up from the dead. Now, we have all sorts of technology today regarding life and death. I mean, if a person dies, we can shock them and bring them back to life, can't we? If a person dies, we can kind of force their heart to start up again. But that's not exactly what Paul's talking about. We can also use DNA coding, and we can make an exact copy of somebody, a clone of somebody. We use that DNA coding to make a replica. So if somebody's dead, we can take that DNA coding and implant it in something, or maybe we can't do it yet, but maybe we will be able to shortly. But again, that's not what Paul's talking about. He's not talking about making an exact copy. We can even imagine somebody having their brain frozen or their body frozen and hoping that one day they'll be able to bring them back to life. So when they die, they get frozen immediately, and then they're hoping that science and technology will be able to one day reanimate them and pay lots and lots of money to do that because of their vanities and pride and greed and selfishness. But again, that's not what Paul is talking about either. What Paul is talking about is a person who has died, their body has been left to decay as the normal decay process begins for 3 days, because he's talking about Jesus in the grave. Now, if you don't know how a body begins to decay, but if you don't understand this process, it begins immediately when the heart stops. That's why it's so important. They have just a couple of minutes to get that heart started up again before real lasting damage is done. And if they can't bring that person back in just a couple of minutes, they're done. Why? Because the body has already begun the process of breaking down on the cellular level. The organs have begun to break down. Everything has begun to break down. The blood has begun to congeal. Everything is breaking down from the moment of death. It's beginning. And so here's Christ, who's been dead for 3 days, decomposing for 3 days. And he's saying, who can bring somebody back from that state? And the answer is nobody. Not even with all of our technology today can we do a miracle like that. Both of these events are in the power of God and God alone. God is the only one who can incarnate the Son, God the Son, into the flesh. God is the only one who can come down out of heaven, who can die, be decomposing for 3 days, and bring that same body back to life. God is the only one. It's impossible for anybody else to do that. And that's what Paul's really getting at here. He's saying, these things are impossible. These things, like bringing a dead body back to life, like ascending into heaven to meet in the spiritual realm with God and bring Christ down, like obeying the commands perfectly. All these things are impossible together. And then he goes on in verse 8, and he says, but what does it say? So here's the idea. Paul has said, these things are impossible. It's impossible to obey the law. It's impossible to bring Christ down. It's impossible to raise Christ up. These things are all impossible. But you want to know what's not impossible? You want to really know what's not impossible, that's undoable, that's miraculous? Well, it is miraculous, but that is doable. What does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim. That whole section, Christ ascending into heaven, descending into the abyss, it all comes from Deuteronomy 30. Moses is nearing the completion of his ministry with Israel. He's nearing the end of his time with Israel. They've been wandering around the wilderness for 40 years. Moses is now 120 years old. He is tired and he is ready to retire. He is ready to be done with the people. He is getting ready to hand the baton of leadership off to Joshua. And before he does that, he wants to bless the people of Israel with some kind words, some guidance, some encouragement. And so he does with these things, this whole phrase here, who will ascend into the heavens. And why is that encouraging? Because he's saying, you want to know what God wants? You want to know what God's will is? You want to know who God is? You want to draw close to God? He's like, well, who can ascend to heaven to know him? Who can descend into the abyss to bring him up? Guess what? You don't need to do either of those things. God has revealed himself to us. God's done it. It's here. It's here. And that's what he says here. The word is near you. Why is it near you? Because Moses wrote it down for them. Because God revealed it to Moses. Moses wrote the first 5 books of this Bible. So the word is near you. It says in your mouth and on your heart. How is it in their mouth? Well, they read it. They read it and they talk about it and they study it and they think about it. It's in their mouth. And how is it on their heart? Because they love the Lord. If they love God, it's in their heart. It's on their minds and in their heart. And that's what Paul is saying. The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim. And I want to remind you that when you believe, not only is the word near you, I should say it this way, not only is the written word near you, but the living word is near you. The written word is the Bible. The living word is Jesus Christ, the Son, described in John chapter 1, verses 1, as the Word becoming flesh. The Word is near you. God himself is near you. And I wanted to remind you of that fact today because the Jews missed this point. The Jews thought, we need to get close to God. We need to climb this mountain of righteousness so that we can get closer to God. And if we can just be righteous enough, we can draw ourselves closer to him. And they missed it. They missed it. It wasn't about climbing the mountain of righteousness. The Jews thought that we could just dive deep enough into this ocean of obedience. If we could just swim deep enough, we can find the Lord in his deepness. But they missed it. It wasn't about them swimming. God had come to them. God was near them. God had come to be with them. And how much more have we seen God desiring to be close with us? So much so, he was willing to take on the form of a child and to be shamed by the cross and everything between the cradle and the cross. A life here with us. God desires to be close with us. God is close with us. We just need to realize it. I don't know what's going on in your life today. I don't know what hard things you're facing. I don't know if you're struggling with your faith, or if you're struggling with the challenges of life, or if you think and you feel in your heart like, I don't know where God is in all of this. I don't know how God can be present in this. Know that he is. Know that he is near you. Know that he cares. He doesn't just care about the events of a nation. He does care about those. He cares about the events of an individual. He cares about the events of his child. He loves his children. God is near you. His word is near you. His living word is near you. It's in your mouth. And if you believe in Jesus Christ, it's in your heart as well. And I want to leave you with an image that I hope will stick in your minds. Go ahead and cue up the video for me. An image that I think is powerful, and I want you to draw from it and just remember the image of how a father is close to his children. How a father can be close to his children, even when the children don't know it, when the children don't realize it. Go ahead and play that.
11-year-old Carly, the softball field is more than just a place to play. It's become a place of solace, something to fill the void while her dad, Sergeant Mike Clark, has been deployed. For 9 months, Sergeant Clark has been overseas, serving our country in Iraq and Kuwait. But this isn't the first time the Clark family has been without Dad. Mom Jamie says Sergeant Clark's biggest fear while he was away, not death or injury, but that Carly, then just 4 years old, wouldn't remember him. This time, though, Carly knew her dad was coming home, just not exactly when. But he was, and much sooner than she thought. As Carly's team, NEA Crush 03, came into bat, Sergeant Clark made his way in. Family, friends, even umpires in on the surprise, ready to stop the game as soon as Sergeant Clark stepped onto the field. A moment 9 months in the making, timed perfectly. Not a dry eye in the stands as father and daughter were reunited again.
You may not be able to see him. You may think he's far away. But God is near. Nearer than you might imagine. Let's pray. Father, you are the perfect Heavenly Father. You watch over us, and you are with us, even when we can't sense it, even when we can't feel it. We know that your word speaks of your will, speaks of your desire in our lives. Draw close to us and let us feel that presence as we draw close to you. Father, we love you. We thank you. We praise you. For you are the Heavenly Father, whose word is near. The Heavenly Father, who is near. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.